This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name is Ladek. Thanks so much for joining me today for this episode of the eLearn podcast. My guest for today is Matt Hunckler, who is the founder of PowderKeg, the place to plug into tech outside of Silicon Valley. In this really community conversation, Matt and I talk about the origins of PowderKeg through Matt's own struggles of looking for opportunities in the tech startup space outside of Silicon Valley, and how Matt made the decision to choose a different path, take a pay cut, and jump on the opportunity to become a part of what is now the PowderKeg network. And P.S., when's the last time you took a chance to really stretch yourself and grow? I mean, ask yourself that honestly. We also talk about why all things in Matt's life, and therefore PowderKeg, lead back to community, and how this continues to serve and fuel his vision for supporting others by sharing knowledge that can be applied immediately. We also talk about how the first iteration of the community, which was called Verge, evolved into PowderKeg to provide that critical density of resources. Things like talent, capital, and partnerships. These resources that every company or organization needs today. We also talk about the importance for all of us in finding our niche tribes where we can truly geek out in our passion, but also making sure that we consciously seek out other experiences so that we're consistently expanding, growing, and finding our blind spots that we need to fill and in order to stretch. We talk about also how PowderKeg is helping to bridge the gap between higher ed and the jobs world, especially in the tech space, of course. And then finally, we round out our conversation talking about the maturing of the digital and tech space and how this is affecting people's choices for where, how, and whom they want to work for. And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. If you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, I give you Matt Hunckler. How are you, Matt? Oh, I think you're on mute. There you are.
Talk over you.
Super cool. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. I know I always ask everybody this, as we kick this off. I know where you are, but tell us, I mean, where are you sitting today? I love your office. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Because it's actually real. It's not something like this, but
this is the home office, which is based in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm coming at you live from the cloud, as the entire tech world is these days, working at least in hybrid work environments, mostly remote still. And I think that's, no longer the new normal. It's the normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we've got a great team here at PowderKeg and excited to be here.
Great. Yeah. So let's dive right in because I wanted to, I want you to first tell us about PowderKeg. Tell us a little bit, not only the history, but sort of the service you provide, but then let's take it into how we can connect what you do to the e-learning universe.
Yeah, sure thing. So we PowderKeg is the place to plug into tech outside of Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley for the last several decades has been the epicenter of technology. As things have moved more and more remote and virtual and into the cloud, really Silicon Valley has had sort of an unbundling, meaning the resources, the access, the connectivity that Silicon Valley had in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, which really gave that community an advantage and why you saw a lot of amazing innovations coming out of that area. And you still see amazing innovations coming out of those areas. But that really has become decentralized. So decentralized in the same way cryptocurrency is decentralizing finance. decentralized in the same way that e-learning can now be done from anywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a physical space or location. And I've been working in this space for the last decade plus. Really kind of started for me actually right out of graduating college. I thought I was going to move from Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University is. Kelley School of Business is where I went to school. And I really thought I had to graduate and move out to the Bay Area, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, to keep growing the business I had started in college. I thought that's where I would need to get capital, get customers, get more talent. And fortunately, I was plugged into a group of entrepreneurs here in Indianapolis, where I still live today, and was plugged into an amazing community called the Orr Fellowship, named after former Governor Bob Orr. And that community of recent graduates and then classes before me that had graduated, plus the access to executives, tech executives, for me was compelling enough to actually take a pay cut from what I was paying myself at my business to join a high growth tech company. Because for me, the learning was more important than anything else.
I want to stop you right there. I want to talk about that for a second. We live today in a universe that is saturated with ballers and players and bling. And I mean, and this is the true story. I'm here in Mexico City. Last night, my wife and I went to the Justin Bieber concert here.
Nice.
Right? And I was actually talking with some of my colleagues earlier, just saying, like, what's it like to be 28 and never have lived in the reality of anyone, right? And so, I was in this stadium with 60,000 other people, listening to them scream their adulations at this guy. And yet you are now talking about making that choice and be like, hey, you know what? It's not about the dollars and cents. Talk to me for a second about how you knew that was a good decision. Like, I'm wondering, how do we talk to people who are in education today, especially learners and lifelong learners, where maybe we look at the happiness equation or the equation of what's going to get me to where I'm going to be rather than just what's dollars and cents?
I think I knew that from a lesson previously. And learning it the hard way. So I actually did my first year of university at Purdue University. So 2 hours up the road from Bloomington, Indiana. It's actually where I grew up. So had already spent 15 years there. All my professors, my freshman year at Purdue, not all, but a lot of them were like friends or like classmates' parents that I knew. I literally
nothing awkward there. There's nothing
across the street. My high school was like 2 blocks from Mackey Arena, the basketball stadium at Purdue. And so for me, I was kind of like thinking that university was going to be this like different environment, and this is going to be a new gear for me. And I had already taken a couple classes at Purdue my senior year of high school because it was across the street from us. And that was like a very common thing to do. My business professor in high school was also a business professor at Purdue. So for me, I was kind of like, this isn't stretching me or growing me in the way I wanted to. And it had nothing to do with the curriculum at Purdue. It had nothing to do, because obviously they're a very top-ranked school, very prestigious school. It had everything to do with the environment and the people and the community and kind of what I was looking for. And what I was looking for was something that was really going to push me to get a little bit outside my comfort zone. Now, granted, I only went 2 hours down the road, but in comparison to being in the same town and knowing every street and like already knowing all the buildings and already knowing most of the professors, to like knowing nobody, new town, never been there before, didn't even visit it, because growing up in a Purdue town, you learn that IU is far inferior, which is false. But, because of that rivalry, I had no idea. And the only reason I discovered it is because I was dropping in on some friends' classes freshman year when I went down to, frankly, to party with them. One of them was like, hey, we're going to go to our business class. And, the buddies I traveled down there with were like, we're going to stay in bed. I was like, actually, can I come along? And I was just loving it. So
nice.
I learned the lesson that like, it's not all about dollars and cents, because I lost all of my scholarships, even though I had a direct admit into IU Kelley from high school. Once I chose Purdue, that was taken, that was
sure, of course.
So, for me, that was tens of thousands of dollars that I was taking on because I had a full ride at Purdue. But for me, it was well worth it to make that jump because one, taking on that debt is what kind of encouraged me and forced me to start a business. Two, putting myself in a new environment and a community of people around me. IU Kelley School as #1 ranked public school for entrepreneurship, which is what I was passionate about doing. Still am passionate about doing, obviously. And so getting into that community of people who were also starting businesses, already running businesses, professors who had exited businesses. And I think some of that existed at Purdue too. But for me, it was just kind of that combination of all of those things. And so I saw this opportunity to stay in Indiana versus go out to the Bay Area as a similar kind of choice. Obviously, the Bay Area is a great community of entrepreneurs. There's lots of technology, but this OR fellowship was something that already existed. It was a community of people who had self-identified. It's called the OR Entrepreneurial Fellowship. I'm like, all right, these are probably my people. And then the direct access to all the executives at the big tech companies at the time, which were ExactTarget, which got acquired by Salesforce, Angie's List, which got acquired by HomeAdvisor. So really getting kind of a front row seat to a lot of that stuff. For me, I wouldn't change a thing. And I think I was open to it because it had worked out for me previously.
And that's right. And I'm not gonna steal your thunder by telling my story, but I swear you just like if I were to just replace Purdue and IU with Colorado College and Colorado State University, you literally just told my entire college.
That's awesome.
I did the literal exact same thing, a decade before you did. So strange.
That's probably why we vibe so well.
So crazy.
Hi, I'm jumping into the conversation real quick to ask you a very simple, quick favor. If you are enjoying what you're listening to right now, if it's interesting, if it's entertaining, if you're pulling away value, if you're learning something, whatever the case may be, do me a favor and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. If it's on your phone, if you're listening on a computer, whatever it is, just take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe. It helps us. You'll never miss an episode and, everybody wins. And if you really like this content, a lot, come on over to eLearn Magazine, throw your email address in there and subscribe there as well for other great content around our blog posts, around the events we play, and of course, this podcast as well. Thank you very much. And now back to the show.
So take me to PowderKeg. What was the genesis of it and what service do you provide? And especially how are we connecting to both higher education universe, but then also the new professional who's growing their skills and then the lifelong learner? Let me throw all three of those sub questions at you at the same time.
Sure. Well, you'll learn very quickly that all roads for me lead back to community. It is the thing that just very early in my career, I read a book called Tribes by Seth Godin. Very small book, which is why I read it. It was like read it in an hour or two kind of book. But it talked about kind of finding your people, finding the people that were, and for me at the time when I moved to Indianapolis, I was like, okay, where are my people? Who are the people spending nights and weekends, developing software, starting businesses, building websites, learning about new technology. And there were some things that kind of existed at the time in Indianapolis, but I noticed that the people were very different than me. I wasn't wearing pleated khakis with the tucked in button down shirt or the 3-piece suit to work. I was working at a startup and I wanted to find my startup people. And so part of the book Tribes is, if you can't find your tribe, build it. And so that's really with me and a couple of friends. That's what we did. We started a community at the time, was called Verge. And the whole thought was just like, let's get everyone we know, which at the time was like 12 people, and get them together. We're going to grab beers. We're going to go to the bar, but we're going to bring our laptops so we can hook it up to the projector and, the little conference room that are at some types of bars. And we're just going to present what we're working on and ask for feedback. This is before Shark Tank, but it was very much Shark Tank without the checkbooks.
Sure, yeah.
And that was such a cool experience. And I did that one time and everyone said, when's the next one? And I said, next one, what?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I just wanted some feedback on my business. This was great feedback. I need to go execute on that. So of course I was working at a cloud technology company full time, but then also starting an e-commerce business on the side. Also plugged into these entrepreneurial curriculum at or fellowship program. And so I was like, I don't have time for this, but there was this need. People kept hitting me up saying, when is the next one? When is the next one? And so we hosted the next one, and twice as many people came to that one. And at the time, the technologies that were new were YouTube and Twitter. So I was recording all of the talks. You can still find some of them on YouTube today. I was recording the talks, tweeting, uploading them to YouTube, and then tweeting them out. And that's how people were finding out about this. Was this new technology called Twitter. I think Twitter was maybe 2 years old at the time. But that was such a cool thing because there were these monthly kind of in-person gatherings, but then the conversation continued over this medium, Twitter, that was kind of new and everyone was using in between events. And over time, what ended up happening is, live streaming started to become a thing. So people from out of town could view the events. Then people in other communities started self-hosting their own Verge events. So, Raleigh, North Carolina had a chapter, Kansas City, Missouri had a chapter. And of course, we provided, some of the materials and lessons learned because we kind of operationalized everything here in Indianapolis. But what started to form was this sort of like regional and eventually sort of national community of people who just wanted to learn and grow in our careers. And a lot of us were early in our careers and hungry for this kind of community. But the key thing was making sure we had successful entrepreneurs who were there that we could learn from. And so there was a lot of this kind of community that formed early on where, these entrepreneurs who are maybe a little bit later in their career and looking to give back provided them an outlet to do that. And for these people who are earlier in their career, it provided a way to learn directly from someone who was actually doing it or had actually done it. Right. And create a relationship. So it wasn't just like, oh, I watched this video, thanks, Susie, for your advice on how you started your company. It was, I watched this talk and now I'm having a conversation to learn more and actually like engage with the material. And one of the big switches for me when I was going to college was this difference between, I call it book knowledge and applied knowledge. And I'm sure I stole that from somebody, but I'm a voracious reader. My laptop's on a stand of books right now. I think you can see the books behind me. And so I started playing this game with myself in college. Part of why I started a company beyond paying off the student debt was I wanted a place to apply the knowledge that I was gaining. So I would play this game in class where I'd literally be on my laptop. This was before they didn't allow this. But I would be on my laptop taking notes, but also literally trying to take what I'm learning in this venture capital class and apply it to my own business that I'm working on live in that class.
Who doesn't allow that?
Well, so there was a period of time when I was in college where like it was allowed and then it was disallowed because it was like, oh, you're doing other stuff on your laptop. So now it's probably commonplace, but I was like early enough that like not everyone had a laptop. There was, most people had a desktop back at their dorm, myself included. So yeah, there was like a weird period of time where it was allowed and then like it got taken away. And so now it's probably allowed again. Shows you how much I know about higher education these days. Everyone's attending classes on their laptop anyway. So it's probably quite a bit different. But going back to this community, it was a way to, for everyone to get applied knowledge. Say, I have this problem I'm working on. I can't seem to figure it out. I've tried these things. What am I doing wrong? And they get different ideas. And using a methodology which was relatively new at the time called the Lean Startup methodology, which is very popular in the tech world. It was all of us just kind of building community and, in the tech world, failure is actually glorified in some ways.
Sure.
You know, fail fast is a phrase that's used. And I'm really grateful for that, because I think I have a tendency to be a perfectionist, like at my core. But being in the tech industry, it's sort of like that has trained me out of that.
Sure,
right? Because you cannot be a perfectionist and be an entrepreneur successfully. That's my thesis anyway. So
at what point did people like from outside the Indiana area, and obviously you started these chapters and whatnot, but I'm thinking, at what point did people start calling in and be like, hey, I'd love to come, give a talk, or I think that there's an opportunity here. Obviously, probably some opportunistic type of things for people to, put their brand on the table or whatever. But like, when did that start happening? And like, did you kind of feel that like a switch where rather than reaching out and kind of looking for your next guest, they were coming to you?
It was the first one. And
man, come on.
That's just benefit of being early. There was no other outlet for this. Nowhere else was doing pitch events. Nowhere else was doing any kind of fireside chat with entrepreneurs, except in university classrooms, and you were enrolled, to go to those specific classes. So we just benefited from being early on and having the right people in the room. It was literally at that first event. People were like, when's the next one? And then the second half of that sentence is, because I have something I'd like to share next time.
Right.
So
I guess then take me to the next level. Was there ever, did it get to a point where, that like venture capitalists or, someone with a big idea who were looking for talent, or, somebody who just wanted to have their ego stroked because they wanted to talk about how they, they 10x their revenue last week, at what point did that start happening?
Well, so they didn't always reach out. They still don't always reach out. The ones that are in the top 1% of the top 1% of performers, that is, still today, even with our big virtual conferences that we do, I'm still usually the one reaching out saying, hey, we've got a community of over 10,000 tech professionals who are really doing it. They're really building things. Here's the ask. 20 minutes. We get to talk about this topic you're really passionate about. Would you like to come? So that has never changed. And we're always going to find the very best. I do think there was, I promise I'm not trying to be difficult in answering your question. I do think there was a time when there was sort of like the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point.
Sure.
And for us, I think it was around 150 true fans. I think Malcolm Gladwell even talks about that number. I think that's Dunbar's number. Once you have those 150 people who they're going to be there, like as long as there's not a conflict, they're going to be there and they're going to show up.
And even if they're not going to be there, they're going to tell other people about it. They're going to support you in some other way, whatever. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. Yep. And so I think that was like really the tipping point for us. And it really only took maybe it was within the first year that point hit, and we just kind of had this organic grassroots community. And our first couple of chapters happened because people moved to another city from Indianapolis. Like, hey, that's how Raleigh happened. I just moved from Indianapolis to Raleigh. There is nothing like what this was, which is crazy because there's so many great big tech companies there, IBM, Red Hat, now Google and everybody is in the research triangle. So that's kind of how we sort of cross-pollinated initially, before live streaming was, commonplace and, everyone was finding people through, virtually. And now there's so many more tools. We're on StreamYard right now.
Yeah, sure.
We're streaming to all kinds of different social platforms. There's so many different ways to do, comments, dropping a comment below, asking a question, polls. And, none of that existed, even 5 years ago, at least not as like a commonplace thing.
Not even 3 years ago. I mean, It's really the accelerator of the pandemic, at least adoption has been radical, absolutely radical. So take me to, how, I'm not sure if Verge evolved into PowderKeg or if PowderKeg came out of left field, or you recognized that this was a really a need that needed to be filled. So what was the origin there?
So it was one of those things that just kind of organically happened as well. My whole career has been just kind of like listening to what the community wants and building that thing. I did high growth technology companies as a full-time job in addition to Verge from 2009 to 2013. So those are my first, 4 or 5 years in a professional setting, working, full-time, 40-hour work week. I'm using air quotes because it was more like 60 plus, because I was just throwing myself into everything I could, and saying, yes, I'll do that to everything. That was my say yes to everything phase of life. And I burned myself out doing that. That was the hustle grind culture of, early startup tech communities. I very much bought into it. I think I benefited from it in a lot of ways. But the downside was you can't sustain that forever. And so after a startup that, I was working on was supposed to spin off from another company, ended up kind of imploding with that company. I just kind of needed to take a step back, and Verge had grown into this thing that was basically a lifestyle business. And so after taking a few months to really think about what to do next, I didn't think it was Verge. It was kind of one of those things again, where I was sort of like, next one, what, like that's not okay. That's not what I'm trying to do. But in those couple months after I left that last venture funded company, I had been invited to speak in a lot of different places, run some workshops, out in San Francisco for the Ebola Summit, very relevant now. Fast forward 2 years.
I was just saying, wow, that's a long time ago. That's
all the way out to Auckland, New Zealand. Colombia, down in Colombia and Medellin, Aruba, and then just all over the United States. And so in that travel and kind of following just things that kind of popped up, and I did that for another 5 years after 2013, just kind of ran an event once a month in Indianapolis, supported other folks in other communities who are running events in their markets. And it was in traveling to all of those different places, in some cases, like 5 cities in 5 days, back to back to back, and each day is action packed. It's like, 7 a.m., meet with the mayor and all the chambers of commerce. 9 a.m., go to the biggest tech companies in the city and do a tour. 11 a.m., go to the biggest venture capital firm in that city and learn about what's going on there. And it would all culminate in a Verge-like pitch event at the end of the day. So it was sort of seeing that back to back to backness that I started to see a pattern, which is, one, every tech community, you're in Mexico City, very different than Indianapolis. I can guarantee I haven't been to Mexico City yet, but I know some folks that run some startup community stuff there, including yourself. Yeah. But while all these communities are very different and have their own strengths and opportunities, we all suffer from the same challenges. And I would summarize all that to density of resources. And it's what Silicon Valley had an advantage on for so many decades, is that geographic density. Everyone's right there, graduating from Stanford. They're sticking around in the Bay Area. All the big tech, big original tech communities or companies that exited, people were spinning off from them and starting other tech companies. All the venture capital was there. And in fact, still today, 75% of all venture capital nationally in the US goes to the Bay Area.
Wow.
And so this density challenge, density of talent, density of capital, density of customers willing to buy from startups, this is what we set out to help solve at PowderKeg, starting with the biggest pain point for tech companies, which is still today hiring and retaining the best talent. That's how PowderKeg came about.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And is the best talent, because we see it down here. Okay, we see it in Mexico City for sure. I'm on, an embarrassing number of WhatsApp groups, right? Because that's how essentially every small community gets started.
Same in Medellin.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. And at least in Latin America, but actually in many parts of the world. And you see so often, hey, this is my idea, or this is my startup, and we're looking for X, Y, and Z. But one of the things I've found interesting is that it's often marketing folks or operations people or local organizer or, somebody, sort of like a what you'd call a tech job, even though these are all, many of them are, tried and true tech startups. These are e-commerce companies. These are, middleware companies. These are, SaaS providers, these kinds of things, but they're looking for, like, the talent gap is there rather than, hey, I need a front end developer, a full stack developer, a UX UI kind of person, those kinds of things. Is that what you've seen in Indiana as well? Or is it really, is the opposite true?
That's a really good question and astute observation. And actually, I skipped over a part, which is we were originally called hackers and founders. So,
interesting. Okay.
Developers and entrepreneurs. And the whole idea was like, how can we get our technical co-founder and make a space for them? And so that was built into our community very early on. Even if we're pitching something, you're not pitching only the business idea in the business model. Like, you have to have at least 1 minute of your 5-minute pitch needs to be focused on the technology. What is unique about it? What is defensible about it? What tech stack are you using? So that it would be relevant to software developers, DevOps people, you name it. The thing that's really interesting and the way communities have grown is there is a lot of benefit in having niche or niche, depending on how you want to pronounce it, communities. So having here in Indianapolis, we have Indie Hackers, INDY, not INDIE.
Okay.
So Indy, like the Indy 500, Indie Hackers, which is run by someone who started that group around the same time I started Verge, where people can just geek out and nerd out about that stuff, the more technical aspect of things. And I think that's really important to any thriving startup or tech ecosystem, is that, whatever your area of focus is and where you're trying to learn, how can you niche down and find the people who are really talking about similar problems that you might have faced previously yourself, and you could share from experience on, or that you might be facing in the future. And then it's also helpful to be plugged into broader groups where you might run into someone like PowderKeg CTO now is the guy who built the original job board on the internet, which became Monster Jobs or monster.com. And he just happened to be in the back of the room at one of those bars and had, learned about it on a platform called Meetup. And so the magic of colliding with people different than you, there's magic in that too. So that's been sort of a core belief for me for a long time, is like, I try to go to events like Startup Ladies as well, even though the name might not lend itself to thinking like that's where I should be. Because one, I know the organizer and I know that's not the intent of the event, but also it's going to have, there's a totally different circle of people. They're talking about different things that I might not know about, might be blind spots for me. And I think in any career that's true. And Steve Jobs, famously talked about that a ton in how Apple grew and how it grew its competitive advantage. Just the focus of design in the Apple came from things like dropping in on calligraphy classes, at university that he wasn't paying for, and just getting really geeked out about typography. Before that,
and it's
everything was just like this 8-bit, you can't even call it a font. It was just this like blue screen or black screen, white type, quote unquote typography.
Yeah. Well, it seems like such a simple formula and yet such a powerful one that I wonder how many people actively pursue, because putting yourselves in those places of strangeness, newness, outside, as you say, your comfort zone, it offers you moments of serendipity, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. And how could I connect X to Y, or gosh, I didn't even know that this, community of people who do exactly what I need, exists, and because it was called Tech Ladies or whatever, like I didn't even know that was there. It's really super fascinating. Here's where my brain is right now.
Sure.
What you just described used to be owned. It used to be the property of higher education.
Yep.
Right. This used to be, you went to university, you went to college obviously, let's just call pre-internet, right? Let's call, before the dinosaurs. No, I'm just, you went there because this was where you would have your mind blown. This is where you would be exposed to new ideas, but most importantly, you'd be exposed to community, hopefully from, around the world, or at least from a large geographical diversity and ethnic diversity. And that's how you would get that muscle of, holy smokes, look at all these other options for my life, for my career, for my whatever. What you've just described exists today. I think we're all very aware of it. It needs no border. It needs no tuition fee. It needs no, obviously there's organization and structure, but it's very ephemeral, right? Like anybody can throw together a WhatsApp group. Anybody can do this, and I think the most interestingly, I'm now thinking of just like TED Talks and TEDx Talks and those kinds of like these. It has an organic life of its own. The question at the end of this diatribe is, as you're moving PowderKeg forward, and you've built these communities across your whole career, and you've attended them, and you've seen that serendipity. Talk to me about what higher ed has experienced over the last couple of years, where, let's just be honest, it's an existential crisis has happened about where's the value, what is it, and are you filling a gap for them with PowderKeg? Are you working with them? Are you partnering with them? Is this even a conversation? Are they even on your radar? I think that's my question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good observation too. I had the privilege of going to my brother-in-law's graduation from UVA, University of Virginia, last year. And so being on that very historic campus, I think it was founded by Thomas Jefferson. I could be totally wrong about that. But
let's just say it's old.
It's very old. Like there are so many documents in their library. There's so many books in their library that at the time only existed in those libraries. You had to go there if you wanted to learn that material, because literally the book was in that library. And now, to your point, Ladek, there is limitless information, which I think presents its own problems.
Oh yeah, no, it's a huge problem on the other side, right? It's like it's a quest, it's like totally overwhelmed.
Well,
yeah,
and that's where I think universities, at least the ones I think that are adapting well to this, are really setting themselves apart, really by curating content, curating material, curating guest lecturers. I was fortunate to go to the Kelley School of Business, which I think still has the #1 online MBA program, which it also did pre-pandemic as well. So have worked very closely with Phil Powell there, just really one of those people that's thinking, 5, 10, 20 years out in the future in higher ed. And one of the things I really appreciate about how he's thinking is he's thinking entrepreneurially. And I'm sure that's a challenging thing to do, just because of the culture of higher education historically has not been to be like, hey, this is working, let's change everything.
Yeah, sure.
It's sort of like, hey, this has been working, why would we change it? Tends to be, and it's the same thing at big tech companies, right? Like even big tech companies aren't like, hey, this is working, let's change, let's try something new. They're like, this thing's working, how do we increase it by 5 to 10%?
Right.
But a lot of things are getting disrupted right now. I'm seeing way more people come into at least PowderKeg with no college degree. And they're joining tech companies that don't require it. Or they're going to a coding academy and learning to code in a 90-day program. And coming out of that with a, high 5-figure job and a career path
Mm-hmm.
that can support them probably for their entire lifetime, just because of the shortage of technical talent that there is right now. That said, I think there's still a really important place of higher education. One, I personally don't think that virtual can ever 100% replace the learning and relationship connectivity that can happen in an in-person environment.
Well, we know, I mean, there's been a couple other people who have been guests on the podcast here who, I mean, the science is definitive. I mean, it absolutely definitive. And it's really quite interesting about when we think about our need as social animals to be in the same space together and what that means to us and how we communicate, the connection we have, the energy that we share. I mean, I kind of get a little, for lack of a better term, existential here as well, but it is a reality that we can test and people have. The gentleman, his name, I'm totally forgetting right now. His name is John Medina, I think I want to say his name is. But he was describing on an earlier episode about how you and I know how to interrupt each other or interject each other in a conversation because we can our ears actually feel the air pressure difference between us in a room like that. It gets down to that level of stuff.
Yeah.
All of this is to say, no matter how hard we try to go virtual all the time, there will just absolutely never be a replacement for this virtual reality until we are all digital ourselves, right? And at that point, I don't know if
until humans evolve.
Until whatever
centuries or millennia. Right, exactly.
And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like take that forward for me. Like, so as you've seen universities evolve, as you've seen this, how have they started to reach out in a different way, maybe to the startup and the corporate community, or have they started to co-opt and maybe do a land grab? Like I've seen that in some cases where it's like, hey, we're actually, no, our brand means this.
Yeah.
What have you seen in that regard?
Well, we've definitely done partnerships with universities. So, in Raleigh, Durham with Duke and NC State, here in Indiana with Purdue and Indiana University. Obviously had some ins there to make that possible. But I think our closest relationship is with the Kelley School of Business and with Phil Powell because he's forward thinking in that way. Mm-hmm. And because there's this IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis campus. So that's, Indianapolis is kind of halfway between West Lafayette and Bloomington.
And I've just noticed that you Indianans also kind of stick together. I don't know, our executive director.
Oh yeah.
The managing director, Phil Hill. Whoops. Phil Miller. He is very, very much an Indianian.
Yep.
Is that what you say? In
Hoosiers.
He's a Hoosier. He's a Hoosier through and through.
But it's just called Hoosiers. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Great movie, by the way. Hoosiers is a great movie. I think what Phil is doing to engage, get students from the evening MBA program or even the online MBA program, getting them free passes to come and attend PowderKeg events, to network with employers, even when they're in school, or recent graduates who are at their first full-time job to plug in and develop their social and professional networks. But then also reaching out to entrepreneurs and saying, what are you seeing? What are you looking for? Or heads of talent at tech companies and saying, where are the gaps? Like, what are we not preparing students for today that we should be? And even experimenting with things like just-in-time courses and certificates, where you don't have to do a full enrollment in a 4-year program or 2-year MBA, and it can just be a leadership certificate or an entrepreneurship certificate that you can get in a semester with 2 or 3 classes that you're plugged into. So I do think that the universities that can adopt principles like the lean startup methodology that startups have used to innovate for years, I think higher education can and are, not everyone, obviously, but the ones that continue to rise to the top and are seeing their student body grow year after year are the ones that are trying new things and looking for ways to differentiate themselves. I am by no means an expert in higher education. These are just the things that I'm seeing anecdotally. But seeing that partnership between, we've got a coding academy here in town called 1150 Academy, founded by someone I worked with previously, the guy who invented voicemail, also a Hoosier.
Wow.
He started 1150 Academy. It's a nonprofit coding academy. You can learn cybersecurity. You can learn how to code. You can learn all kinds of the top skills that are in demand right now at tech companies. And you can do that in a 6-week program, 6-month program, depending on what you're looking to do. But seeing how Kelley School of Business is partnering themselves with those programs to say like, hey, this person is graduating from business, but wants more exposure to technical skills, and vice versa. This person's graduating with, a certificate in cybersecurity, but they want to be on the business side of things. Now that they have the technical understanding, how do we get them the business understanding where they can accelerate and grow? And that's just kind of where I'm excited, because I do think tech companies, a lot of them are not requiring, PowderKeg included, are not requiring a college degree in order to be employed there. That said, when employees get to a certain stage in their career, that company might not be set up to provide the training that employee needs to reach the next level, to go into that leadership position, to go into that management position. There's so many opportunities for universities to work with private companies to identify, and it doesn't have to be private. I'm just talking about the tech space, but that could be in the public sector, that could be in, the government sector, understanding where are the gaps and how could we provide continuing education so that learning isn't this thing that happens in just this 4-year period after high school, but is the thing that continues through your career and it is continuing to plug you in. I think the other piece of that is just community. I told you all roads lead back to community. The more that universities kind of call that out and actually have ways to network with other alumni, other students, other professors, former professors, guest lecturers, those are the ones that are going to continue to rise to the top. Our IU network has been instrumental in helping us get early customers, investors even, and ultimately for me to grow in my career, but also everyone that's works at PowderKeg to grow in their careers. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. At least that's what I'm seeing on the ground here.
I have 2 more questions. I know we're coming to the top of the hour, and so I know your time is precious. The second one is one I'll ask everybody. I'll ask that one second, but I want to end sort of the knowledge search of this conversation with this. I'm a part of many of these communities, as we talked. One of them is a fairly large digital marketing community. And one of the very interesting things that I've noticed, or that I've seen happen within this community, I'm interested to see if this is happening in PowderKeg as well, is that, people know I've got 3 kids. I've got a wife. I got 3 kids, right? Like I'm on the older end of the tech universe, right? The digital universe. But what's happening in these communities is that many people are coming of age. They're finding partners, or they are choosing to have, create families. I move every 6 weeks and I'm a digital nomad lifestyle, or I can work from anywhere. Like all of that is sort of the reality of what we might call normalcy is settling in for many of them. Along with that comes expectations for when and how I work, expectations for what my team needs to look like. As you were just saying, sort of expectations, we move from risk taking to stability making, kind of choices. Talk to me about that for a second, about what you're seeing in PowderKeg, because now digital and tech has been around long enough, right? 30, 40 years, where there's a maturity to it. And there's that, we always hear about that fresh startup, dynamic, blah, blah, blah. But then there's this huge glut of people who are like, I want to be a part of it, but I got to pay the bills every week. I got a mortgage. And you know what, frankly, I don't want to move. Like, talk to me about, obviously you didn't, you want to stay in Indiana. So talk to me about that.
Well, what's great right now is that people have options. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. The challenge is similar to the curation challenge of like, now there's all this information. How do I know which stuff is the good information? There's so many different companies. There are so many different company cultures. There's so many different leaders. There's so many different products. And it is hard to stay on top of it. I try to, but I don't even stay on top of 10% of it. A lot of what our community is built around is helping people curate. We've built this software that helps people kind of curate what they care about, starting with, companies. Every company has a profile that outlines their culture. It outlines their product, that has their benefits and work flexibility preferences in there, all of which are matchable attributes, meaning someone can say, I'm looking for this type of company. And then PowderKeg, serves it up out of its database of thousands of tech companies around the country to that person to say, there you go. If you'd like to ask for an intro, you can request an intro. If you just want to follow them passively and keep tabs on what you're doing, you can do that on the platform. But I think these are the types of tools that are going to continue to help people and companies stay on top of what's going on, because there's so much information out there right now. And then another piece of what we are doing is curating. So if you are interested in a new city or a new industry like fintech or healthcare tech, we have those resources on the platform too, all of which are contributed to by the community and curated by the community so that people can learn more about it and discover these collections of companies that are top ranked across different factors or in different industries or in different geographies. And so having these resources, and PowderKeg is certainly not the only one that's doing this, we are just laser focused on anyone that's interested in the innovation and tech economy, which I would argue is the entire economy. But if you're interested in it, in that kind of thing, like there are all kinds of resources there, including just a weekly newsletter to stay on top of which companies are getting funded, which companies are getting acquired, what are people doing to level up in their career, and what kinds of jobs are available out there. Plugging into a few communities like this can be extremely helpful. And what we're really trying to do is be that one community that's the generalist community. You could meet another person like yourself, but you also might meet someone in an adjacent industry or an adjacent function of the business. But then also provide connectivity to these other communities. Like if you want to go deep on software development in fintech, we can connect you to that organization that does that thing. Or if you're really interested in Mexico City, we can connect you with Ladek because he can probably get you plugged in. So really finding ways to create that connectivity in a way that's all supported by software and supported by a community of people who care.
Fantastic. Final question then for you is, what are you personally, Matt Hunckler, most excited about for the near term, like 6 months, 12 months? What are you looking at there? Like, and it could be something in PowderKeg, could be a shiny new object, could be a startup, could be a new tech that you're using, could be a new puppy that you're getting next week. I don't know. What are you most excited about?
I think I'm most excited about right now. Certainly there is fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the public markets right now, at least in the US. Tech companies at least public tech companies are getting a haircut right now in terms of valuation. But I think that particularly companies outside of the Bay Area that are a little bit insulated by a lot of the hype that's been happening the last 2 to 3 years. Hype meaning, increased valuations, new businesses being launched that don't necessarily have a path to revenue or a solid business model. I hope those companies pivot and find a way to succeed in this new world we're shifting into right now, where you need those things. But I'm also excited for the companies that are outside of the Bay Area and the people that work at those companies, or the people that could work at those companies. Because I think really, we call it the Unvalley. I mentioned earlier the unbundling of Silicon Valley, but also this area outside of the Bay Area, which all has connectivity back to the Bay Area. I think there's just going to be this moment of opportunity, and we've been having it the last couple of years too, as everything's gone remote. I think it's going to extend even more in these coming years, and I think what that's going to do is provide more opportunity for more people to plug in, learn about tech, build amazing networks, build amazing careers that support really rich lives and have a high quality of life because they get to live where they want to live. And just seeing more of that, seeing more of those stories as these big shifts are happening all around us, which certainly has its downsides too. My portfolio is certainly down, as are most people's who have, an index fund.
Absolutely.
But the pro is I think it's creating all of this opportunity for so many more people.
Fantastic. Matt Hunckler, you are the CEO of PowderKeg. This has been a fantastic conversation. I love it. And I just can't wish you all the best. I think that's gonna be wonderful. I want to remind me though, I think that you have an event coming up, or did it just pass?
We just passed it. Passed it.
Darn it.
But
Sorry.
We've got another one coming up. So that's the nice thing about PowderKeg. We've always got another event coming up. And if you want to sign up for our free newsletter and free software tools, it's just powderkeg.com, PowderKeg, all one word. And we've got to get you on the virtual stage, Ladek, because I think all the things that you and your community are doing to help plug people into the latest trends in e-learning are so important. And learning, to me, is one of my top 3 core values. Lifelong learning, and what you're doing for the industry to help more people do that is really important.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you for the conversation today, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Ladek.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.